All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the lineup. My name is Lily Dite. I'm on the publicity team here at Soho Press. And thank you for coming back. We've got a really wonderful event for you tonight. So I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping stuff here at the beginning, and then we will hop into the authors that are joining us tonight for this event. So we are our series is co-sponsored by Mystery to Me Bookstore in Madison, Wisconsin. So if you are interested in purchasing the books that we talk about tonight, please consider purchasing them from Mystery to Me. All of our authors have signed some special book plates for you, so you get a very personalized touch with the lineup book plate when you purchase a book today. And we'll also be giving away some door prizes near the end. So make sure that you are staying tuned till the very end. We'll be reading off the names, and we'll also be emailing you after the event to let you know if you've won a Mystery to Me gift card with which you can buy these wonderful books. The lineup, a little bit more about our series, is a new-ish series from Soho Crime, where we spotlight Soho Crime authors and we put them in conversation with one another. Our next event after tonight will be on September 18th at 6 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and it will feature a very special preview of Ramona Emerson's highly anticipated new novel called Exposure. She'll be in conversation with Danielle Tressoni, and we're very excited about that event. So you can go to sohocrimelineup.com right now if you're interested in signing up for that, and it'll be just the same as it is tonight. We look forward to seeing you there. Finally, all of these events are recorded. So if you have a friend or a loved one that you'd like to send this event to after the fact, you can go and copy the URL link at the very top of your page and send it to anybody that you'd like to see it. Also, we will have a session for Q&A after the questioning. So if you've got a question for one of our authors, you can put it into the little thought bubble on the right side of your screen that says Q&A. And we will get to them afterwards. So thank you again for being here. I am now going to introduce you to the authors we've got joining us. Unfortunately, Michael Sears is unable to make it tonight, and we're sorry to have missed him. But first of all, we've got James Benn, who is the author of the Billy Boyle World War II Mysteries. The debut, Billy Boyle, was selected as a top 5 book of the year by BookSense and was a Dilys Award nominee. A Blind Goddess was longlisted for the Impact Dublin Literary Award. The Rest is Silence was a Barry Award nominee, and The Devouring was a McCavity Award nominee. Benn, a former librarian, lives on the Gulf Coast of Florida with his wife, Deborah Mendel. His new novel, The Phantom Patrol, is the 18th installment in the Billy Boyle World War II mystery series, where an investigation into a gang of Nazi-affiliated art thieves leads Billy Boyle and his comrades directly into the line of fire at the catastrophic Battle of the Bulge. Thanks for being here. Again, Jim, you're a lineup veteran at this point.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
And then Scott Phillips is a screenwriter, photographer, and the author of 7 novels and numerous short stories. His best-selling debut novel, The Ice
9.
Harbor.
Actually, it's 9.
9.
Yeah.
Well, I gotta change my notes. 9 novels and numerous stories. His best-selling debut novel, The Ice Harvest, was a New York Times notable book and was adapted as a major motion picture starring John Cusack and Billy Bob Thornton. He is the winner of the California Book Award, as well as being a finalist for the Edgar Award, the Hammett Prize, and the CWA Gold Dagger Award. Scott was born and raised in Wichita, Kansas, and lived for many years in France. He now lives with his wife and daughters in St. Louis, Missouri. His new novel, The Devil Raises His Own, is a dark historical adventure that captures the beginning of the Hollywood studio system and the blue movie industry that grows up alongside it. Thank you, Scott, for joining us. So, as we always have with the lineup, we often have books that occupy very different worlds. And that is such the case tonight. So I like to start these conversations by asking you a little bit about your research process, each of you, just to kind of get the ball rolling. Scott, do you want to start?
Sure. Well, obviously, Jim and I are both, we both write historical novels, or at least Jim does, and I occasionally do. I like to write historical novels. And I find that I like the research so much that I almost never, I really don't want to get around to the writing part. My book, Cottonwood, I started researching before I did start writing, and um, yeah, I'm surprised I ever got around to the actual uh, composition of the book. This one, the second one, Hop Alley, was a little bit different in that I'd written some books set in the 50s, but Hop Alley was in the same series as Cottonwood, as is this. Not a series exactly, but some of the same characters and the same historical milieu. And this one, so Hop Alley, I had done a lot of the research beforehand, and this one I have been doing the research just off and on for years and years and years, and I continued to do the research while I was writing the book. If I needed something, if I needed to know, well, which way did the streetcar run through Burbank in 1916, then I'd stop and I'd take a day to figure that out. And, um, I find that the things that really help me, and I'm not writing about wartime really, so it's not really so much about historical facts. It's more about um, atmosphere and daily life, and what were things like, what did things feel like and sound like. And so I do a lot of reading of newspapers, contemporary newspapers, which are just fantastic sources. You've got classified ads and um, man bites dog stories and stuff like that. And I find that to me is always the um, most useful. Also, I had a 1915 city directory of Los Angeles, and that was just, I mean, I could read that for entertainment. I mean, it's that kind of stuff. I eat it up. Yeah.
Okay. It's interesting that you mentioned um, the newspapers and that sort of thing, because there's the greatest resource I can find is a travel book published in the 1930s, well, they weren't publishing a lot of travel books in the 1940s, but like a travel book about France from 1935 is just perfect because it'll give me street maps, it'll give me what buildings were there, what buildings were intact, and a sense of what life would have been like. Because there's the factual history um, that I have to get right, and that takes its own research. But then there's sort of the human social setting. What, like you said, what was it like? What was it like to live during those years in that place, and what were some of the common things that people would encounter? Um, and it's funny, today I just got stuck, no pun intended, on Scotch tape because I'm writing, and one of the characters has hidden something, taped it under a desk drawer, on the bottom of a desk drawer. And I said, wait a minute, when did they have tape? And you can't assume a whole lot of stuff. So turns out now I know more about adhesive tape than I ever thought I would. But masking tape was the first adhesive tape, and it wasn't invented until 1925. And what we know as Scotch tape didn't come around until the late 30s, and actually was relatively rare. And parenthetically, it's called Scotch tape because the guy who was developing it talked to his bosses at 3M and said, "You're a bunch of Scotch uh, executives," meaning cheap Scottish. And they thought it was funny, so they called the tape Scotch tape. So now I know that. Now you know that. Um, but that's sort of almost the ridiculous level that you can get to in burrowing down into the time period to get those details right.
Yeah. And I love stuff like that where you get in and you do a deep dive into something that's really a tiny, 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 tiny
Yeah,
little thing in the book, but it's nice to get it right.
yeah. I just live in fear of that one person who's an adhesive tape expert and giving me a bad review because I had the wrong kind of tape in the wrong year.
And they will, and they
They
will.
will. Yeah. Well, yeah.
I'm always so curious, especially when you're talking about such dense source texts that have so many um, opportunities for new knowledge. Do you have anything that sticks out to you that you found out in your research for your book that you had to leave out because it just didn't make sense with maybe your plot? But was there like a special fact that you learned or something that you really wanted to include, but you just couldn't?
Scott?
If I find it interesting enough, I'll conjure a way to put it in. I have been accused of kind of going uh, a little astray occasionally with my weird little factoids.
I'll just mention that one in this book, The Phantom Patrol, the storyline relates to some extent to the Monuments Men and stolen art in World War II. And a character, a real historical character that's in the book who I found fascinating was Rose Valland. She was portrayed in the movie The Monuments Men by Cate Blanchett in a totally inappropriate Hollywood sexy way that had nothing to do with reality. Rose Valland was a woman who wanted to be a teacher, came to Paris in the 30s, and volunteered at the Jeu des Paumes Museum because nobody would pay her. But she was very knowledgeable in art history. And when the Germans came in and occupied France, they employed her, they paid her to keep track of all the artwork that they were stealing, and they channeled it through the Jeu des Paumes Museum in Paris. She never let on that she could speak German and understand it, so she listened in to all the conversations that the Nazi officials were having. She kept hidden notebooks about where all the trains were going, where they were taking this stuff. She made friends with the conductors and engineers, the Frenchmen on the trains, and they would tell her where she was taking this stuff, where the Nazis were taking this stuff. And she did it all by herself. This is a woman who came from the country, became a volunteer at a museum, and found herself in the center of the stolen art trade being run by the Nazis. What she did was absolutely incredible. And even to the point, she kept her secret so well that when Paris was liberated, the resistance well, they beat her up, but then they almost threw her in jail as a collaborator. And very quickly, enough people came forward to say, no, she was working on our behalf. But her story is just astounding for the fact that she did it all by herself. And while she's in the book, and I do the best I can to bring forward her story, she almost needs her own book. And I couldn't get as deep as I wanted to in it. But it's really a remarkable person.
Was there an article about her recently in the New York Times?
There might have been, yeah.
I feel like that's vaguely familiar to me. Mm-hmm. And I agree. It was a really, really interesting piece about somebody who probably deserved.
She stood up to Hermann Göring and later got to go to the Nuremberg trials and testify against him. So the whole story comes around full circle. So anyway, I wish I could have done more about her story, but she's in the book.
Well, and Jim, I have some more questions for you on the topic of Rose, but to focus on art a little bit, The Phantom Patrol obviously talks about real works, has a big focus on art. Did you have like a pre-existing interest in art history that provided a foundation for your research for this, or was this like learning about art and art history kind of a new endeavor for you for this novel?
Well, I had the idea maybe 10 years ago to write about the Monuments Men because I had read the book when it first came out. But then the movie came out and it just seemed to be everywhere, and I didn't want to copy that. So I set the notion aside, and now at the point we are in the war, the Monuments Men have collected all this artwork. And I got interested in going back to them and seeing what happened to all these collection points where all the stuff they found was being stored temporarily and was accessible to thieves. But what really stoked my interest in it was something entirely different. I watched on Netflix a documentary called This Is a Robbery about the art theft at the Isabel Gardner Museum in Boston. and it's just astounding. It's the greatest art theft in history. Um, and it was just done by a couple of guys. They still haven't recovered the artwork. And I can't recommend this documentary enough. This is a robbery. So that watching that got me thinking, okay, art, stolen art. How can I get back into that? And when I discovered that there were these collecting points all across France, and where a lot of the artwork was vulnerable because it was just being transited back to owners. I thought that would be a way into the story to involve the Monuments Men and Roosevelt.
Jim, I have a quick question. Did you ever read a book called The Bug in the Martini Olive? It's about a San
Oh,
Francisco it's about a San Francisco detective named Hal Lipsett, who was the basis. He was the character in The Conversation that Gene Hackman played was based on him. And he was a CID man in World War II. And
mhm,
there's some really fascinating CID stuff
mhm.
about things he did and things he investigated.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, if you
Say the
haven't
name
read it,
again.
it's called The Bug in the Martini Olive. And you might find some inspiration there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, question for you, Scott, about getting ideas and turning them into books. When did you think, aha, I'll make a movie about the early pornography industry?
Well, uh, I wanted to do a book with this character, Bill Ogden, who I'd written about in the Old West, as an old man. And I figured I knew he lived into the 1930s at least, and lived to be quite old, and because I'd written about it. And I wanted to write about him, kind of in his 70s, not
Mhm.
what in those days was considered really old, and what today is somewhat less so, I guess. Seems less so to me. Anyway,
I'll buy that.
but yeah, yeah. But I wanted to write something, and I figured that would set it around World War I. And I knew he was going to end up in World War in Los Angeles, and that's the birth of well,
Mhm,
it's the birth of Hollywood, let's say,
mhm,
not cinema, but it's kind of the birth of the modern film industry, and have always found that fascinating. I've always been really interested in silent film, and a friend of mine named Chaz Hansen, who writes under the name Charles Fisher, had written a really wonderful short story in an anthology called Measures of Poison, um, called Tons of Fun. And it's about a morbidly obese guy back in the silent era who sees some Fatty Arbuckle cartoons and thinks, or sorry, shorts, comedies, and thinks, well, I could do that. And so
mhm.
he goes out to Hollywood, and instead of being in silent comedies, he ends up in silent porn. And I just found that so funny that it had always kind of been in the back of my mind. I didn't really intend for it to be it's funny because this book kind of is has a fairly complicated plot, but I really didn't plan it out. I really thought that the the porn stuff, the blue movie stuff was going to be a small kind of side thing.
Mhm,
And it ended up being kind of right out in front. So,
mhm.
um, but yeah, I don't, and I guess I just got a dirty mind. Ask my wife.
Kind of going off of that, Scott. So something to pull a little way from the blue movie part of it. You feature a lot of multiple characters and perspectives in this book. I was talking with Mark a little bit about this actually. From a craft level, can you just talk about the process of organizing a novel like that?
I have no idea how I did it. I I'm a seat of the pants kind of a writer. I don't outline. I have tried to outline, and I find that I get bored because I know what's going to happen. And I think that is almost a childish attitude. I don't. recommend it. Um, but I do kind of make things up as I go along. And, sometimes you take a wrong turn and you say, well, that is obviously going to lead me into a brick wall, or I'm going to have to end this character's story before the book is really ready, to come to an end. So I improvise and I hope for the best. And I don't know if I'd ever do another book with this many point of view characters, because I think it's a miracle that I finished it. But that's basically it.
I'm always so interested to hear authors talk about their process, especially when they talk about, I am a seat of my pants writer. I don't plot anything. I just put in the pages and
I plot a little bit. I mean, I have an idea of what's going to sort of happen, but I don't really know how people are going to intersect, and but sorry, good.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's amazing. It was I think it was Cara Black. We had her on a lineup
Well,
a
no,
few yes,
mhm.
earlier this year, and she was talking about she had a writing instructor that would make all of their students take an acting class because it would make them be a little bit more. It was either Cara or maybe it
That's
was Camilla Trinchieri.
yeah,
I don't remember,
that's a
but it
great.
was just more present in their characters.
I've always thought this, and I know some actors turn out to be really good fiction or screenplay writers because they have that thing where they are pretending to be someone else and they're unselfconscious about it. I don't think the same is true of writers as actors necessarily. But I do
True.
think that it helps. It helps with dialogue.
Yeah.
It helps with motivation. It helps with not writing a whole bunch of characters who sound and act just like you.
Right.
Yeah.
Then I'd imagine it would from an improv perspective as well. If you're
Mhm.
just coming in and ready to play and ready to discover. That's
Mhm.
very cool.
Yeah, and also, you get that thing where, well, what if this happened instead of that? And a lot of interesting stuff comes out of just that kind of, well, what if an anvil just dropped on the guy right now?
Yep.
True. And maybe it would be great if it did.
Yes, sometimes
Yeah.
it is. Sometimes you got to get rid of a character and you just say, well, a streetcar, bam.
That's one advantage to writing in wartime. Bad things happen. Grenades
Yeah,
just come your way, and you got
yeah,
to get rid of a character pretty quickly.
yeah,
That's very
yeah.
true. Jim, are you similar to Scott in that you kind of like let things flow, or are you more do you have like a stricter outline when you go into writing a book?
No, I take notes on the background, the history, the setting. Um, but no, I've seen people who lay out 3x5 note cards on the floor, and they have
Yeah.
a whole carpet full of the whole book before they write it. I simply can't do it. I have to be in the act of writing. So I'll have an idea to start a book or an idea for a section, and I just let the characters come onto the page. And it's only then when they're there uh, and they start to interact with each other. And as in acting, you bring out the differences in how they speak, how they feel about things, so they start to clash with each other or sync with each other, and then the story moves forward.
Mhm.
But I was just today kind of stuck literally in a room, and I just okay. There was a knock at the door, so that's all I needed to bring some more people into the scene and get it moving. But if I'm not writing, if I'm thinking about the story, I can get paralyzed. But if I just start writing and bringing some characters into the scene, then it starts to move along and things happen that amazingly down, 6 chapters later have an effect on where we are. So yeah, definitely not on outliner. No. I think it's just how our brains are wired. Some people write the story as they write it. Others write it through an outline, which is just their mental process working
Yeah,
in a different way. But it's all the same thing.
yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting to hear everybody's process.
Hmm.
On kind of a craft level, I always love to ask folks what the best writing advice they've ever received is. It's a big question.
Ooh. Hmm. Um, well, Jim Burke, I had James Lee Burke for freshman comp at Wichita State many, many years ago. Um, and it was before he had become famous. He had published several novels, which were at that point out of print, and he was a really good teacher. He was a very encouraging teacher, and I later took creative writing from him. And I was writing these kind of Benchley-esque sketches, and Robert Benchley, James Thurber, both of whom are writers that I really love, and uh, S.J. Perlman and that kind of stuff. And I was writing that sort of thing, trying to be funny, and it was I had turned something in, and he brought me in, and he said, man, you write good prose, but it's always the lighter side of the news, man. I can't believe this is what you take seriously. And, I got to think that there's something that's more important to you than, getting a laugh. And he said, humor's a great tool, but make it a tool and not your whole thing. And at the time, I just kind of thought, well, Jim, you write stories about strangling people. It's a little too dark. But I kind of realized that that was something I liked, and that humor is something that, I use it. It goes in there. I try to be funny. But, just take it a little more seriously and write about things that really move you.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, I wrote the first two novels in the Billy Boyle series, and they hadn't sold yet. And I decided I needed to go back and rework them. And I found a class at Wesleyan University in Connecticut on writing the novel. And there's a lot of short story classes, but it's very rare to find an academic class on writing the novel. So I took that, and the woman teaching was Rachel Bosch, who's an author. She's had a couple of books out. She's an excellent teacher. And she, you'd bring in a chapter and she would mark it up and we'd talk about it in class and she'd hand it back to you. And on the last page of one of the chapters, she wrote, Jim, remember, the story has to move down as well as forward. And I had gotten the forward part working, but I had to bring it deeper, had to get the characters more involved and more of a stake in the story, and more harm to them, really, more psychic harm in terms of what they were enduring. And that's never left me. And I think that helped turn the books from what could have been, kind of a Hogan's Heroes kind of lighthearted romp of a wisecracking Yankee soldier into something that has had legs now for 18, 19 books.
Mm-hmm. Take it
Thank you for that.
seriously. In other words, sort of similar. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And the reader is going to respond so much differently to that
Mm-hmm.
than to something that's a lighthearted, people like lighthearted romps
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Hogan's. I love Hogan's Heroes, but yeah, I think that's, yeah.
Yeah, add in more stakes and a little more depth. And yeah, I love that. It's again, I just love hearing from folks out there. It always seems to make sense, I think, too. I wanted to circle back and talk about Rose, first of all, but also you mentioned a lot of other there are cameos from real people in Phantom Patrol, and some J.D. Salinger's one, Rose Valland, obviously. And I'm always curious how you go about balancing writing a work of fiction about real people. What does that look like?
Well, it's part of it is a discovery process. So I know the setting, the pretty precise time, because these books are told sequentially. And I work at discovering what interesting people were possibly intersecting with these activities. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. In this case, J.D. Salinger, I didn't know this, was a counterintelligence agent attached to a U.S. Army division, landed at D-Day, fought all across France into Germany, was present at the liberation of a concentration camp. He saw things. And I went back and read some of his short stories, and it's reflected in there. I mean, his writing was all about dealing with his experience in the war. Now, so he was a writer, and he was really easy to work with because he understood what I wanted him to do. So he played a role in an investigation in Paris, and he was great to have as a character. Then I stumbled upon David Niven, who was also an intelligence agent attached to General Montgomery's headquarters. He had been in the Army before the war and before he went to Hollywood and started making a name for himself. So I figured, well, let's bring David Niven onto the stage. And he was having so much fun. He did not want to leave the book. He just wanted to keep going with Billy and Kaz through their adventures. And he was so much fun to have along that he just kind of started to dominate the story because he left so much information in his two memoirs about his wartime experiences. Most of it not dealing with the hard stuff. He had a lot of great one-liners that he kept alive in his stories, and I was able to introduce into this book. But the fact is, he was the real deal. He was trained as a commando. He worked at the front lines, getting information to bring back to Montgomery's headquarters. So he was, as an actor, he took to his part and started just ad-libbing all over the place. And I could barely finish the book and get him off the stage. It was just so much fun. I mean, the guy had his own personal armored car that was loaded with brandy and heavy machine guns. I mean, how can you not love that?
I love that.
There's the David Niven.
Yes. Those are great memoirs, by the way. They
are. They're just, I mean, you can't stop reading them.
Yeah. And it's not just Hollywood. It's Hollywood and, oh, there he is.
Yeah. Hey, Michael.
Hi, Michael.
Hello. Forgive me. I'm an idiot.
No, it's okay. We're glad you joined us. Everyone?
Because, now you can talk about you for a while because we've been talking about you the whole time.
I'm sorry for the things we said now.
I'll have to watch it in the playback. Michael, let me read your bio, and then I have a few questions to ask you about your book. Also, folks, because we are getting a little bit closer to the end, if you've got any questions for Scott or Jim or Michael, please put them in the Q&A. But we are joined by Michael Sears, who spent over 20 years on Wall Street, rising to become a managing director of Payne Weber and Jeffries & Co. before leaving the business in 2005 to pursue writing full-time. His books, a number of which are national bestsellers, have been nominated for and received numerous awards, including the Edgar. An avid sailor, he lives in Seacliff, New York with his wife, poet and artist Barbara Siegel and the cat Penelope. His new novel, Love the Stranger, follows Ted Malloy, a Queen's attorney with a troublesome penchant for noble causes, as he investigates the murder of a corrupt immigration lawyer. It's the follow-up to his 2022 Nero Award-winning novel, Tower of Babel. Thanks for joining us, Michael.
Thank you very much for having me.
So I had a few questions for you. We've been kind of talking about overarching conversations about craft and kind of how they influence the books that we're talking about today. So you have written about Wall Street crime and real estate shenanigans, and these are both areas that you've worked in finance and in real estate. And we always hear that thing, write what you know. And you had kind of an interesting answer in one of your author questionnaires about whether we should write what we know or not. So do you believe that it's important to write what you know?
I don't remember what I said.
That's okay. Just
I do have opinions on the subject. And I started out writing what I knew. I wrote about Wall Street. And I did for a while work in this real estate gray areas as well that my character Ted Malloy captures. But really, most of what is important in my books is character and the believability of my characters, the believability of their emotions and their emotional arc throughout the book, and that's the most important thing for me. I've explored other things and other places, whatnot, but these resonate for me, and it works. So I go with it. But any of my characters are much more important to me and to the story than to whether it takes place on Wall Street or I say it often. Whether the story is about Wall Street shenanigans or real estate and corrupt politicians, it could also be about somebody who stole grandma's jewels, and it's going to mean as much to me and to my readers, I hope, because we're going to care about grandma in that book. So,
yes, that is what I remember from your questionnaire as well, Michael. That's so funny. Scott, I had another question for you before I want to ask you all what you're working on. But Scott, you are a photographer as well as an author. And I'm curious about some of the like through lines between photography and the film industry and your book. How much of like your personal experience and your personal knowledge went into this book, and was it part of your inspiration to write about this period of time?
Well, as I say, I'd already written about this character, Bill Ogden, who's a frontier photographer, and he kind of goes through, almost from the daguerreotype. He's a little bit past the daguerreotype period, but he goes from the tintype to what we call the wet plate to the dry plate, which is when you didn't have to stick your own disgusting chemicals onto the glass plate, and someone would do it for you and it would arrive dry, to the invention of celluloid, which Jim has something to do with the invention of cellophane tape later on. And I kind of got it because I've always known photographers who resist whatever the new technology is. And I see Bill as somebody who's able to do it throughout his life because he just accepts that the technology changes. I mean, I'm sure there were people when the dry plate was invented who were like, it's not photography if you're not smearing your own disgusting foul collodion onto the glass in the dark, and under the hood of the, and I think Bill is somebody who, if he were alive today, would be doing digital and not mourning the loss of the old technologies at all. So I love photography and I know a lot about it. And so taking pictures of things is a big part of my life. It's not a thing I do well, I do a little bit professionally, but not really do it as a professional anymore, but it when I travel, my one of my considerations is, well, what camera am I taking? What am I going to be wanting to photograph? Uh, and it leads to situations where you run into people, and maybe somebody objects. You're taking a picture of a street because, yeah, that's my house on that street. And so it leads to things happening. And I don't know, is that a good answer? I don't.
Yes, it's a great answer.
Hey, Scott, may I just quickly, is Bill in any way based on any historical photographer, or is this he?
No, none in particular.
Okay.
Although, I think he's kind of he's a contemporary of Gardner and Brady and all those people, but he's also a contemporary of Stieglitz, and in a way. So I think my notion is that he's just somebody who he's kind of like Zelig. He just goes through and does a little bit of everything. And
Well, I've got one more parting question before we announce the winners of the gift cards. And folks, if you've got any last-minute questions to put in the Q&A box, it's on the right side of your screen. We can read those. But I would love to know what is next for each of you. What are you working on? Michael, do you want to go first?
All right, thanks. The next is Love the Stranger, which is the sequel to Tower of Babel. It's I call it the Queen series, and Love the Stranger is still following the corrupt politicians and nasty real estate developers and whatnot of Tower of Babel, but it also concentrates on the immigrants, and how they are such a part of Queens and make up the whole picture of Queens, and the character of Muhammad and his family are very central to the book. That's coming out December, and meantime I'm working on a third in that series. So, and as I'm very slow, I have no idea when that's coming out. But
That's okay. You got to keep us checking in. Scott, what about you?
well, I just finished a film project, or rather a part of a film project that is now kind of temporarily on hold, and we'll see when I go back to it. The next book, I'm not exactly sure what it is. There was one I started around the same time as The Devil Raises His Own. That, speaking of what Michael was talking about in terms of what the background of your book is, and whether it's just stealing from grandma or whether it's stealing billions on Wall Street, this one this one revolves around the theft of $11,000. So I may go ahead with that, or I have an idea about the music business in the '70s that would kind of be a sort of a mirror image of The Devil Raises His Own.
oh,
Very
Yeah.
cool.
that's oh, okay. That sounds great.
Yeah. Jim, what about
I'm
you?
Well, I'm about 5 chapters into the Ninth Circle, which brings Billy Boyle to Cuba for a little change of pace. And he's been shanghaied by Commander Ian Fleming, who was deputy to the chief of Royal Naval Intelligence. So he's brought Billy to the Caribbean to investigate the murder of another British intelligence agent. So right now, Billy's just enjoying the sunshine and rum, and it's early in the book, and nothing too terrible has happened yet. But I'm getting all these James Bond vibes with Ian Fleming in it. So it'll be fun to have him evolve as a character.
So are you going to go into the post-war now that you're kind of edging toward the end of the war? Are you going
to? I get
to?
asked that a lot, and I've decided that all I can really do is find the next book to write and do the best job I can. Because I mean, it's just I can be driven crazy by that notion, but I've still got it's great. I still got 4 or 5 more months of war to go. A lot of death and destruction. So that's one reason why I shifted the scene to an unusual setting to sort of be a little vague about the timeline here. But so there's plenty of stuff to write about, and whatever happens, happens. We'll let Billy decide what he wants to do.
One of my favorite authors, Patrick O'Brien, who writes a series of naval history, British naval history, warfare, and he comes right out and says in the intro of one of his books, halfway through, I'm throwing out the real historical timeline because forget it. I'm going to just keep writing books. And
who was a genius at that was Philip Kerr and his Bernie Gunther series, because he wrote those whenever the heck he wanted to. So you might have one, and it was set during the 1930s. Next year, it was set in the 40s. He just moved through his timeline with ease, and that was pure genius. But
I have thought about doing another Bill Ogden book and going backward, setting something in 1900. Why not?
Yeah.
I have a question for Lily.
Yeah.
What's it going to be like? Soho recently signed my good friend William Boyle.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering what things are going to be like in the publicity department. The publicity department, excuse me. When you've got a series of Billy Boyle books and a series of Bill Boyle books.
We are not going to be able to stop talking about Bill Boyle. That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that.
There got to be some crossover possibilities.
It's true. We're very excited.
Yeah, you guys can go on tour.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Bill and Billy and Bill, because we've got Bill Ogden too.
Yeah.
That's so funny. I had not thought about that. The smart one, Scott. We've got a question for Jim, but if anybody else has an answer too, feel free to pipe up. Doug wants to know, where is a good place to find vintage travel books?
That's a good, if I knew it, I wouldn't tell you because I would want to go buy them. So I've just stumbled on some in used bookstores. I can't even recall ever finding them online. So it's mostly in used bookstores, come to think of it. But I'm not going to tell you which ones.
There used to be a travel bookstore in Los Angeles. It's not there anymore, but it was just travel books.
Yeah.
Those are the days. A very niche request. Thank you, Doug, for writing that in. I suppose it's time to announce the winners of our gift cards. So we will start with our $25 gift card winner, which is Doug Levy. So thank you for your question and congratulations. You won a $25 gift card to Mystery to Me. Our $50 gift card goes to Carol Wheeler. Thank you. Clapping? Clapping? Okay. And our $75 gift card goes to Tom Watson. So Thank you all. Clapping. Thank you all for joining in today. We would still be here even if you weren't. So thanks for making it less awkward for us. And we appreciate it. Scott, Jim, Michael, any parting words?
Keep buying those books, folks.
Yeah, keep reading.
Keep buying those books, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you all for taking time out of your schedule. You all are very busy, so thank you so much. And thank you all for tuning in once again. We will see you next month with Ramona Emerson. Thank you to Mystery to Me, and everybody have a good night. All right. Thanks so much.
Bye, everybody.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
See ya.